The reason I love you guys is I see your hunger and your thirst for God in every moment. And that just, as a pastor, as a Christian, as just someone who also loves Jesus, that's why I fall in love with you guys every single day. And just more and more. And when your guys are gone, we miss you for sure. And I was thinking about this chapter. We're going to begin in verse 15. But I used to do a job at Terminex International. It's a pest control company. So our job was to get rid of rodents and infestations in the houses. And I was thinking about this specific couple verses. And we had a job, I remember, our job was to go in and remove insulation because rodents had infested and get all the gross stuff out. And my wife made me shower when we come home 3 times before I came into the house. But that used to be the job I would train employees to do. And I remember getting there, and this one particular job, the new guys beat me to the house early, and they started working, and they had about 30 minutes worth of work done. Well, one of the jobs that you have to do is, because of the plastic that's underneath the house, it's a vapor barrier. It keeps the moisture from going up into the rafters and rotting out the wood joists. That was part of what we replaced. But there's an order to do things. And what they did was they replaced the vapor barrier first. So you had this nice piece of clean plastic. It looked great. And then after they installed it, then they took all the insulation down that had all the rat droppings and everything else and started tearing that out so it fell on the nice clean plastic. And they had started putting up the new by the time I got there. And literally it was their decision to say, look, all these mouse droppings, rat droppings, and all this chunks of insulation, we're just going to continue on. We're not going to fix our mistake. And I had to get there and say, guys, no. I'll have to run to the store, buy some more plastic, but we can't do it this way. There's an order to things. First things come first. So removing all the stuff out, then putting the new back. You can't kind of cut corners in this area. And I was thinking about this chapter, and it just reminds me that there is an order to things. God has ordered things a certain way, and first things have first priority. So let's read the book together in Colossians. We're going to do verses 15 through 18 tonight. It says, He is the image, talking about Jesus, of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body of the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. Now this is our text tonight. But what I'd like to do, this is, in order to get the order right, I want to start with a little bit of foundation. So keep a place in this chapter. And I'd like for you to turn over to Romans chapter 1. And we're going to start there, and I want to bounce back and forth so you can follow in your scripture, or I'm going to provide, it's up on the screen as well, so you can follow along that way. So just a reminder, Paul is battling 2 things. The idea that if anything exalts itself as number one, or salvation for people other than Jesus, in the form it's taking here as the Roman Empire, but he's coming against that in his theology. So it's everything that exalts itself, and then also that mixing of beliefs, that when beliefs are mixed together, you have a new religion that is born. That's where we get the New Age, Hinduism, we get Unitarianism. That's where we get Christian Science today. Something else birthed it. It wasn't new, or it wasn't old, it wasn't based in something. It was because something mixed and something new was born. And Paul was trying to stop the heresy before it starts. And he showed us last week that in the couple verses that we are the passive agent in our salvation. It's totally that God is worthy of all glory and no one else, and we had nothing to do with it except acknowledging him. And to understand, Paul is establishing order in these 3 verses, but we have to go back to the beginning and start there and then work our way back up so we can understand the order. So beginning in Romans chapter 1, verse 18, Paul starts out by saying, For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. So Scripture is very plain. It says, there is none good, no, not one. So that means every man has this same tendency, whether saved or sinner. We still have this old man, this flesh that comes in, and it at times it wins. It does. That's why we have an advocate in Jesus that continues to be our advocate. But it's a sinful nature that every person has. And especially before someone becomes to know Jesus, they are controlled by it. But it's saying right here that the fact of the matter is they know whether they say I believe it or don't believe it, or they live it or don't believe it. Every single individual, their soul cries out that I know there is a real God. There is a creator. They have that truth in them. But what they do is they actually suppress the truth. And what does that mean? It's kind of like my son Nathaniel. If he picks on his brother and sister and they come to tell on him, well, I knew as soon as one of them rounds the corner, hey, Nathaniel did this. And before they can actually start to get out what he said, Nathaniel starts talking over them because he's suppressing the truth of what happened. He wants to be heard in what he's saying before the truth actually comes out. Let me get my point across. And every unbeliever struggles with this, that their sin nature is louder than their very soul. Now, when Jesus enters in, he says we're a new creation. He separates that. So now our soul and the word becomes louder than the sin. We can hear clearly what we should be doing in these matters. But for a sinner or an unbeliever, this is what they're facing. The sin nature is louder than their very soul. That's why Jesus is pursuing them. Let's continue in verse 19-20 of Romans. It says, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So God in his power and his majesty has worked it in such a way that everything created, from the plants, the animals, the mountains, the way the solar system rotates, all these things, you literally have to believe a ridiculous lie to believe that there's no creator, that there's no God. But that's what people are believing. That's what they do. And literally, as we look at ourselves, we have to understand we're made a certain way. We are made eternally to be in awe of something. Now, my favorite place to go is the beach. I love going to the beach, and it's probably not for the same reasons everybody else does. It's not to put my toes in the sand or go surfing or go fishing or build sand castles or any of those things. The reason I love to go to the beach is I like to stand out and I like to look at the ocean, because as far as I can see, I can't cover the expanse of it. It goes farther than what I can even see. And I love the way that it makes me realize just how small I am. I'm standing in awe of the vastness. If you go to Mount Rainier, it's the same thing. I love to stand at the foot of that thing and just look and say, man, that is awesome. We are made to be in awe. And we literally, when we stand in these things and we stand out in nature, and like when he pulled out Abraham, said, count the stars if you can. Well, Abraham couldn't count the stars. He had no physical way. But he brought him out to say, look at what I've done. This is my evidence. My fingerprints are on everything. And you literally have to suppress the truth of that in order to believe a lie. And I think about when Epaphras comes to him with this urgent message that false teachers are entering this church of Colossae, and he's saying, I need your help. Paul realizes the enemy that's coming in, because it's the same enemy that started in the garden. It's the same one, that they are coming in with this deceit that they're taking their eyes off of God. And Romans 1:21 starts out by saying, for although they knew God, they knew him. So they know this truth, although they know him. And he established in Colossians that verses 3 and 5 where the church of Colossae actually knew God. They had faith, hope, and love, and that can only come from God. So they know him, but there's still a danger. Even when we know him, we can be deceived by flesh, because we're still in a spiritual battle. And like this verse is saying, the Colossians know, but there's this ongoing war. Will I listen to my soul that Jesus created in me anew, and saying that God is everything? He's top. He's above it all. Or will I listen to this lie, this insatiable desire for my flesh to control me, and say, no, he needs help. He needs more. You need all these other things that the world is offering to give us. And this, especially in the mixing of religions, well, I need what the Druids have, or I need what the mystics have, or the Judaizers, all these things. I need to wrap that into Christianity because it kind of lacks in this area. And Paul's coming in and saying, no, it doesn't lack at all. Don't believe the old man. Don't believe that flesh's desire. It says, continuing in verse 21, it says, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him. And how did Paul open up the book of Colossians in verse 3? We always give thanks to God. So, again, he isn't taking the direct route like he is in the book of Romans, but he's covering this again with the church at Colossae, where he's covering this attack, but now he's on the offensive. So in Romans, he's building a defense against it and showing them what happens. But now he's like, you already know this. Let's get right to it. Remember, we always thank God. He's correcting the wrong thinking. And then he knows what comes next. That's why he's establishing right off the bat. He's letting them know, you know God. You know what he's done for you. He's rescued you from darkness, and he has conveyed you into the Son of the kingdom, the Son that he loves. And he's lovingly and boldly doing it so that he's going up against these false teachers. And then if you continue in verse 21, it says, this is the result. If he doesn't step in to the church at Colossae, if he allows us to go on as a pastor of pastors, this is what can happen to the church. It says, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. So the moment that this starts to take seed, there is a chance for anyone to become vulnerable, and their heart will become blackened or darkened. And he's saying, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to step in. I'm going to take my apostle title out, and I'm going to step in and do something about this to prevent the Colossians' hearts from becoming hardened over time and proclaim the truth to them. So in our text tonight, we're going to go back to Colossians 1:15. This is how he starts. He says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. That word image in the original Greek, it means two different ideas. The first idea is that it means the likeness. Like if you were looking into a mirror, Jesus is a resemblance to God himself. Well, we also have that. We were made in his image. So the other part of that definition to that original Greek word is much deeper than that. He's not just a mirror. It talks about he is the manifestation, is what the definition is calling it. And since he is fully God revealed to us in a way that we can physically and tangibly see it, touch it, and hear it, that's who Jesus is. It's not just a reflection. It's not, he didn't bring a picture down to show us of God. He was God incarnation. He became God. He became right here for us to see. And it's a little bit stronger than God became visible. He's literally saying, when we talk about this, that he's the invisible God. Well, we can see some clear fingerprints of God. We can see his word. We can see the law that he's approached. But what he's talking about here is at this point, before Jesus came, God was unknowable. What I mean by that is we could not know him intimately. We could not be with him intimately and have a relationship with him because we were intertwined with sin. Jesus had not set us free yet. But now Jesus is on the scene, and now we have the opportunity to actually have a relationship with him for the first time in all of creation when Jesus shows up. And then he says, he calls him also the firstborn. And I'm going to take a crack at this one. The original Greek is prototokosos. And it just means he's providing a priority in time and a supremacy in rank. And the Apostle Paul is not calling Jesus a creation here. This is similar to when Isaac and Jacob and all these guys that had their inheritance, they were the firstborn. They were the ones who would rightly receive the inheritance. So he's not talking about he's a creation. He's saying, when it comes to my inheritance, he's firstborn. He has priority. All that I have as God is Jesus's. He is the rightful heir. He is the King of Kings, and he is my son. So he's talking about he is the firstborn. And he's establishing Jesus right off the bat, Paul is, as he has this unchallengeable position on earth and in heaven, that he is supreme. He is it. He's the firstborn. He has title over everything. And Paul's giving thanks to him because, why? And Romans said they wouldn't give thanks and honor to God. And Paul is correcting that right off the bat when he talks to the Colossians, saying, give thanks to God. And now he's giving the honor, that total honor, back to Jesus as the firstborn. And a lot of times we forget to do that. We really do. But again, he's saying he is the one that's worthy of the inheritance and the only one. Now, again, in Romans 1:22, he continues on what happens. So their heart gets blackened. They realize this is what happens when we are deceived. And it's in Romans 1:22. It says, claiming to be wise. This is the people that their hearts are blackened. They are literally saying, I am smarter than God. Claiming to be wise, they actually became fools. Now, if you ever wonder why people do some of the foolish things, this is it. They believe they're smarter than God, and they act foolish. But this is the first step in the path when we suppress the truth of God. We literally think and live like we are smarter than God. And I'm not going to say there's nobody in here that's going to raise their hand and go, you know what, I think I'm smarter than God. I really do that. But we live it a lot of times. And it can be the most rebellious sinner lives this way, and even the most self-righteous person, religious person, lives this way. The difference is the sinner will say it verbally and say, look, I don't need God. I'm good on my own merit. I'm good enough. I'm good enough. But the self-righteous person lives it. And what they do by their actions is saying, I'm good enough by my works that I don't need God. I'm smarter than he is because by my works, I'll be fine. That's the difference. So one actually says it, and the other one is living it, but they're both living out that lie as a religious person as well. And Paul spent last week reminding the church that we are that passive agent in salvation because God is the only wise king. He's the one who rescued us from darkness. He's the one that sent us Jesus. He is the only one with wisdom to see everything from past to present to future. He sees it all in context. So when we think about who is actually wisdom, it's foolishness to think of someone who only lives to be, at best, 100-something years old. And we think we have more wisdom than God. And Paul is lovingly bringing this to light. And these teachers, this is what's going on in Colossae, and it's still going on today. People come in and say, I have been enlightened. I have the mysteries to the universe now. It's been revealed to me and me alone. I have it. I have it. And you probably heard this. You need to update your old God or your old Bible. Bring it in the 21st century. Well, the funny thing about truth is, truth never changes. If it changed, it wouldn't be truth. So why is this new stuff that's coming in? Why would that be truth? It needs a foundation to even set upon. So the big cry is right now, there's more ways to get to God than what you really know. And Paul's coming in with the answer saying, no, there's only one way, one truth, and one life, and that's only through Jesus. And Paul's bringing them back to that. And then the second step when we suppress the truth is in Romans 1:25. It says, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And that, even as Christians, we still have this tendency where we will worship the creation more than the Creator. And this is what they're doing. They're worshiping Rome. They're worshiping everything else. And eventually we'll get into it, but they're even worshiping angels over Jesus. Remember, they were wearing amulets that called out to Michael and Gabriel and said, if we wear this, then that's the protection that we need as a Jewish mystic to protect us from the evil spirits or all this bad stuff. And they're worshiping angels who are actually a creation. They're heavenly beings, but they're a creation. That's all. Who in here likes to eat out? Who likes to not do dishes and not have to cook and actually go to a good restaurant? Not McDonald's, I mean go to a good place. Well, there's that. And even if you like to make your good food, you probably have a more understanding of this. But if you like to eat out, this kind of philosophy would be this banquet was set in front of us. I mean, there's whatever you want. There's steak, there's salad, there's the best chicken. Whatever you want is set in front of you. And you just eat that and you enjoy it. And then you turn around and you look at the food and you praise it for cooking itself. You praise it for preparing itself. And it sounds like foolishness, but that's literally what we do when we worship creation. Now, any of us know there is someone who picks all the good food. They pick the best chicken. They pick the best vegetables. They pick all the good stuff that goes along with it, or the salads, and they make sure it's fresh. And then there's a chef who comes in. He prepares all that. That food didn't end up on the table by itself. It's not worthy of praise. The person who prepared it would be the one who needs to get thanks for, this is a great meal. Thank you for cooking it. Thank you for doing this. But yet we're in there praising the food, and the person who did all the work never hears about it. That's what we do when we worship the creation. And it just seems like foolishness, but we've all done it. Whether it be on it could be food, it could be our house, it could be our physical appearance or our body, it could be on our mind, it could be a car, a new phone, it could be a new computer, all these things, and the list just goes on and on and on about what we worship. And then Paul goes on, he combats this specific thing in Colossians 1:16. So he keeps them from wanting to worship the creature or the creation by bringing them to the realization. In 1:16 he says, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. That him being Jesus. They were created for him and by him. So he's establishing Jesus is the creator. He's not a creation. He's always been, just like God the Father, he's always been there. He was there when everything was being formed. He was there before that. And he's always been here. He is a creator. He's not a creation. He's the second part of the Trinity. He completes the Godhead. To understand what that means, though, what does it mean that creation was created for him? Think about that. Let that sink in. I think we have to start all the way back in the beginning with Genesis. Let's look at Genesis chapter 1 for a moment. Verses 27 through 31 says, So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And verse 31, very important. And God saw everything. Everybody say, everything that he had made. And behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning on the sixth day. Did God regret making anything? No, everything was good. He created it. And he talks about, I'm going to pick two specific things. He created food, and it was good. And think of how good God he is. He gives us taste buds so that we can enjoy just the different flavors and the richness and savor that. He created that for Jesus. Not for us, but for Jesus. But we get to enjoy that gift. He even talks about he created sex. It was good in the context of biblical marriage. It's good. He made parts of us that are more sensitive so that we can enjoy the pleasure of intimacy with our spouse, with our husband or our wife. It's not something, let me make this very clear, it's not something the devil put in after the garden, okay? It's not something that he belongs to. It's not something, but he has twisted what God made good. But here's how we use these things wrong. When we worship creation, it doesn't last. So that's the bottom line. But what we do is when we worship creation and we get that new thing, that new house, that new car, and it starts to get old, what do we want? We want the next new thing, the next best thing. And it's an endless cycle. Why? Because we have this eternal desire to worship an all-knowing, a sovereign, perfect, powerful God, and yet we're worshiping stuff. So no wonder stuff that doesn't last cannot quench that need for us to worship, to stand in awe of something. That's what we're facing when we try to worship things. And even worship our own failures sometimes. Our own, literally, we just get caught up with our own failures, and we worship and we won't let our lives go anywhere else because we're failing. It can be anything that we worship. Now, practically, we talked about in our Philippians study, Paul uses this weird analogy, and he says, our God can be our stomach. That's interesting. Now, for those that you don't know me, I really love food, okay? And I'm glad that Jesus talks about it through all the Gospels, but I really love food. And there's nothing better than nice red ground beef, and it's cooked medium well, and you put crispy bacon. Now, I'm not talking about stringy bacon. I mean, you can grab it from the end, and it sticks straight out. That's crispy bacon. And you put pepper jack cheese on that thing, and not sesame seed buns, okay? I want those powder buns. Those are great. And then you slice up avocado and all the sauces that you desire. That is good food. But what happens is we eat that burger, and then what? It's gone. We enjoyed the moment, but it's gone. And that's what all creation does. But where we miss out is the opportunity of why God created it. It was for Jesus. He created all things for him. So what we're missing out is we don't give thanks for it. And I'm not talking about the little prayer that we say at the beginning of the meal, God bless us food for our bodies, give us strength, and help us have a good day, and thank you for the bounty. Amen. Those are good, and don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about something that's much more real than that. When he gives us these things, that great meal should spur a reaction that turns our eyes to God and to Jesus and say, thank you, God, for giving me such taste and providing me such pleasure in this, that you are such a good God to give us those kind of gifts. And instead of it sealing it out when that sandwich is done or that new car gets old, it has nothing to do with that. It rolls past that and goes into heaven, and it becomes an eternal worship. That's why things are created for Jesus. They're gifts to us, but they were created for him so that we could worship him for all his handiwork, for all his majesty and all that he does, because he is a giver of good gifts. We should worship him for it, not just praise the gifts. He goes on in Romans 1:28 and says, they did not see fit to acknowledge God. So here's the third step. The first two, they thought they were smarter than God. They worshiped the creation instead of the creator. And now we see the third thing. They did not see fit to acknowledge him. They could not see fit to acknowledge him. You can do, everybody can eat. Sometimes you can even do the other two things. You may not worship creation. You know, you may submit. You know what? I know God is probably smarter than me. We can live those two things. But this is where every time they failed. We can get all those things. And even if life's going well, we can forget to acknowledge God, especially when they're going well. So this is the final step of suppressing God's truth of who he is. We stop acknowledging him. We start living our lives, and you'll see everyone else live their lives the same way. And think about it for a second. We have no problem acknowledging God in a hard place. When life is at its worst, when the storm's there, we will run to him. We have no problem doing that. But do we run to him when something good happens? Is he the first person to hear about it? God, thank you for bringing us through this. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for what you provided for us. Or is Facebook the first one to hear it? Is somebody in your family texted before God gets acknowledged? Is he the last person in line that you celebrate good things with? Is he that last person? They forget to acknowledge him. So even though they might get the other two right, they were not acknowledging God about who he was. And he proclaims Jesus at this time of confusion and deceit and this futile wisdom that they're having in Colossae, this ridiculous lie that people are believing, that they literally have to suppress who God is when they know without a shadow of a doubt that there is a creator God, and I know who he is, but yet they push him down deep. And Paul is waking them back up. Look, guys, this is the trap that you've been falling into. Mankind has been falling into it for thousands of years. Nothing has changed. Wake up. He's doing it lovingly, but he's challenging them. And then he goes on to Colossians 1:17 through 18, one of my favorite scriptures. It says, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together, and he is the head of the body, the church. Not the pastor. It's Jesus. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. What does that mean? It literally means that Jesus is top. He is above everything. There's nothing else to get or to gain besides Jesus. The goal for us in life is to know him. He is it. Now, why would Paul proclaim it this way? It's because he had an intimate view of what it's like to not have Jesus preeminent in your life. Now, remember, Paul came from the darkness. He taught about last week, look, he rescued us. And sometimes we forget, do we remember who Paul was? He was this angry, self-righteous, violent, accompanied murderers in his day. He was an accomplice to murder. This is who he was. And from all that darkness, from the most, I look at Tacoma and I think of all the people that we encounter, all the angry men, all the violent men, all these individuals. This is who Paul was. And if there's anybody that is evident of the hope of the gospel coming into a man's life and redeeming him, or a woman's life going through the same things and transforming them into who Paul became, we forget about it because he's so loving and so compassionate that everything that Paul was after his encounter with Jesus Christ, he is no longer the same. He's preeminent. We tend to jump so fast into his great teachings and forget that Paul is sitting under house arrest. He's just a mere man. But what makes him different than the rest? He's following the one true God. Even in chains, chained to a Roman guard 24/7 in this prison sentence, when he's writing this letter, he is still following the one true God. And I've wondered sometimes in my life, have you ever wondered for a moment, is there a situation, is there something that we're going through, and you say to yourself, is this it? Is this the thing that God can't conquer in my life? I think of the children of Israel when they had Goliath, and they're sitting there in front of him, and they're seeing this mammoth giant for the first time. This is it. You know, all these victories. God gave us the promised land. He's did all the miracles in Egypt, but this 9-foot guy, this one person, this is it. It's too much for God. Too much for him. Could be my anger's too much. My sorrow's too much. My restlessness is too much. My loneliness is too much. And what it causes us to do is just like the children of Israel, we hide in our tents as that thing boasts in front of us. This is too much. God can't save my marriage. God can't save my kids. And it's there to taunt us. And Paul is saying, remember that Jesus is preeminent. And just like David, he will go out before you. He will defeat that thing that boasts and thinks that it's mightier than God. He will bow it to his knees. And then when you get on the field, the battle is already won. So the problem is what do we have preeminent in our life? Is it Goliath, our problems? Is it stuff? Or will we allow it to be Jesus? Will we allow it to be him? And these people are just deceived that Rome is the great salvation because they brought peace. They brought prosperity. They're not going through all the hard times anymore. All these different religions pouring in, trying to do what? Remove Jesus off the throne. He's not enough, is what they're saying. He's not enough. He's not preeminent in their lives, is what they're trying to deceive them from. I like the psalmist in Psalm 119:37. This is what he writes. Turn my eyes from looking at worthless things and give me life in your ways. One of the reasons that we partake in communion is so that we can have a continual reminder as a group, as a fellowship, that Jesus is preeminent. It takes our eyes off of everything that is worthless in this world, that doesn't last, and it puts it back where it belongs, on Jesus. Even if it's for a few moments, we get to do that tonight together. So what does that mean for us right here, right now, though? It means if we have had things that have been preeminent in our lives, we can repent right now and it's over. It's done. And that Jesus allows us to freely come before him, that unknowable God that it talks about, that invisible God that we could not have a relationship with. We can enter into that relationship without wrath. We don't have to worry about consequences. He's there for us. And I love it that Jesus went first. He's the firstborn from the dead. We have that great hope. He was our example. He's the one that receives inheritance. He says, you will join him. You'll be joint heirs. That we have to physically taste death in our bodies, but we don't have to eternally understand it because we know him. We belong to him. It means today and now that we can forgive others for unspeakable things. Why? Because we've been forgiven. We understand it. When we partake of this, we understand what Jesus did on the cross for us, that he was there. It means that there's a purpose in our life when it actually doesn't feel like there's anything left. We have a purpose to still be here. And as we take of communion tonight, and we think about the bread and his body that was broken or his blood that was shed for us, we get to proclaim with our lives and carry on the gospel with boldness and confidence. And it's all because Jesus is preeminent.